All righty. So happy Thursday. It is December 3rd. So this is our inaugural static analysis office hours. I see we've got a few things that have been listed here. And this structure that we have for an agenda is something that I was hoping to keep. And so we'll start off with demos, and we're intending these to be non-technical demos and to drive some questions. So we've got one that we want to show real quick. So mono repo support is a topic we're chasing with priority. And I'm going to turn this over to Zach because I think he's got the floor for this.
Yep, thanks, Thomas. So I will share my screen. And folks can hear me, right? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Zach, can you say just a little bit about what problem this solves before you jump into showing it?
Sure, yeah. So with the Node.js scan analyzer, before it required a package.json file to be at the root of a project. So if customers had or users had nested Node.js apps, the scan would not kick off, right? So if they had multiple apps, so, one level down, the scan would also not kick off. So the change was, it's a real simple change. Now we support Node.js scan scans for multiple repos, multiple projects within a repo, right? So this might be better illustrated if I share my screen.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the context, though.
Yep. Okay, Firefox. Okay. So I set up a demo project, and this is an example of a Node.js project with multiple Node.js apps. So there's app 1 and app 2. And you can see they have the package.json, which is the essentially identifier that tells the analyzer this is a Node.js app and the scan needs to happen. So looking at the GitLab CI, just including Sass. And if we look at the latest pipeline that had ran for this branch, you'll see that the only thing that ran was ESLint, and that's because ESLint matches on, if there's any JavaScript code, it will run, but there is no Node.js scan jobs here. So what we did was changed. So I'm going to the master branch now with the change that is currently in a maintainer review right now for the Sass vendor templates. And essentially we just changed the rule to include a double wildcard for the package.json glob. And so this will tell the analyzer, okay, if you encounter a package.json file anywhere in the repo, kick off a Node.js scan. And so if we look at the most recent pipeline for this branch, we'll see that, okay, that job was kicked off. Oops. And then if we look at the security dashboard, we can see there's app 1 vulnerabilities and app 2 vulnerabilities. So this is how we support Node.js scan for monorepos. Yeah, and that's the end of the demo there.
Any questions on that?
Would you mind, DT Santa Cruz, California, solution architect, would you mind going back to your config file for that? Or just kind of the GitLab YAML file.
Sure, yeah. Yep. So here it is.
Yeah, exactly. I was just looking at the rules, the workflow rules. Yeah.
Yep. So for reference, what we have right now, this is the job and the rule for Node.js scan right now. And so you'll see, you know,
Interesting. Yeah. I'm getting a lot of questions from customers around like defining pipelines, and the rules engine is coming out. It's working out great for the conversations, but this is a great example. So thank you.
And
Do we have David Tasher? Do we have a list of those rules that like you have there for the Node.js for all the languages? Is that well documented somewhere?
Like the Heroku builds, like you have to have like a certain thing that's there. Is that where you're going, Dave or DT?
Yep. Do we have a list of, like in your demo, you had to lay that out on to get the Node.js to work, and then is that documented anywhere where like for Maven you should have these variables set or have this stage, or is it automatic off after just adding the include?
So I mean, as soon as there's an MR in right now, specifically for the Node.js scan one. As far as the other ones go, I mean, I will defer this to maybe someone else on the team who's a little more familiar with the documentation.
Let me try to translate real quick. So there's two questions that I'm seeing. Number one, what do we have to do for monorepo support within Node.js scan specifically? What you saw here, what you saw as Zach demo is the crux of a change that's going to be merged into the SAST vendor template. It is not a recipe that needs to be applied for all customers to get the support. Zach, correct me if I made a misstatement.
No, that's correct.
Okay, so in 13.7, including the vendor template, you get it. So that's the one thing I wanted to call out. The other question that was asked was, is there documentation for the rules syntax that is used globally within GitLab CI configuration? Is that a correct restatement of the question?
Well, specifically to make the scans work, like is it because you read the documentation and it says, hey, just add the include SAS YAML, and it works, and for the most part it does. But I was wondering if maybe because I am currently getting a failure in a Maven, that if I need to put some build ops into like a SAS job, or how that correlates, or if it's just supposed to work.
Okay, and that's related to the technical support question you got listed?
That is, yes.
Okay, all right. No worries.
So I do want to step in here. This is sort of a fundamental part about how our analyzer system works and how our entire CI for secure works. Basically, when a secure job is triggered, we do a best effort build that, assuming you follow common software patterns, we'll try to build that application. If you've got complicated build steps, if you've got multiple projects and repos, if you've got other advanced configurations that make building your application unique, complex, or advanced, it's likely not going to pass the best effort build, if you will. So that's where this comes into include the secure CI template, but then you may need to override it with custom pieces like pre-compilation or other custom pre-building. Does that make sense?
That does. That does make sense. Okay. I think I will need to know the format of inserting those. Like, for example, in an earlier stage, we're already building it. So is there a way to just pull that object off of cache, or do we need to go through the whole build stage inside the analyzer image as it's analyzing and then scan. And I could work with somebody after this. I don't want to eat up all the time here.
Yeah, so I'll link the docs for pre-compilation. I think that might be a topic for a future one of these sessions, and us walk y'all through what pre-compilation actually looks like and how you do it. There are tricks for getting artifacts to be handed down to additional jobs. That's not something that we do by default, and that you will have to orchestrate if you need to support this sort of advanced pre-built system. This is described in our docs, which I'll link.
Thank you very much.
Dominic may want to verbalize what he put in the chat.
Yeah, I put a link in chat. I should put it in the doc. There's a list of some variables that are useful, like if you want to send additional compilation flags to Maven or something like that, the list is there with all those variables that are useful.
Yeah, and this is where I'll step in again and say that the pattern that we want customers to be using here is to include our SAST CI template and then to override it with a custom CI configuration where you can modify those variables. I'll also link to the section where in our docs, where we talk about how to properly override our CI configurations.
Is there more people would like to discuss or ask questions about on current topic, or should we move forward? Okay. David, I think we've got you. I think we talked about the item you put into technical support.
Correct. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Q&A. All right. Making sure. All right. Ross, do you want to speak to yours, or should we skip? Should we move forward?
Taylor's point might be more interesting.
Yeah, the only thing I would say
contradicts what you said.
I do think we want to keep this meeting open when possible, but if we have a customer issue that we really need to dig down deep into, we can follow the same pattern that Sin does. We'll pause the recording, discuss whatever we need to, and then resume.
Yeah. My only request, and I'll get this into the meeting template, is that if this is something that we need to pause the recording for, please mark it in the agenda so that we can just, there's no awkward, hey, pause this, that's in the recording. So, all right. Drew, you've got next one, sir.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to stop by and talk about Docker and Docker because I had heard through, the rumor mill that this team had some issues with privileged mode and using Docker and Docker. We're running into the same thing, and Lucas has responded a little bit already, and we've thought about trying to not use Docker and Docker either. There's a little bit of a sort of abiding sense of like, could it be simpler if we don't use Docker and Docker anyway? But Code Climate publishes a analysis tools that we use only as a Docker image. So we've talked about trying to use the shell executor that can solve some other caching problems, but we're not sure if we can get away from needing to run privileged mode for Code Climate analysis, because Code Climate will always be available as a Docker image.
Yeah, so just to vocalize what I had here, we eventually dropped Docker and Docker 13.0, which was much easier for us. And the primary reason we had it in the first place is because we also wrapped a bunch of our own containers. So in a similar way, we broke each one of our individual containers into separate jobs. And so it would be the equivalent of having a code quality Ruby job and a code quality Java job. And then in that case, we could actually use the specific image as the baseline container. So we've talked about this in a lot of different ways. And one of the big issues that we've had with a lot of build environments is for complex builds like monorepo builds. We tried to kind of invert this paradigm where we're looking at publishing our analyzers as packages. And so individuals can set the base image for their SaaS job and then have like a curl down for our specific package into it. So if there's kind of like a inversion of control that you can do as well. I don't know too much about the internals of code climate to do that. The other thing that we talked about is setting up like separate services as well. So you could have if it would be possible to set up these containers as services and then rely on them instead of Docker and Docker. And I mean service in terms of the CI construct of service.
So
does that make sense?
Sorry, could you elaborate a little bit on the CI construct of service?
Yeah,
there's a lot of services we could.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know too much about how code climate does this step, but if it's fetching, what is the interaction between the actual, say is it the Ruby code climate image and
code climate publishes an image that does, they publish an image that does some quick static analysis to determine which engines, which are also published as Docker images, it should download. And then it goes to Docker Hub and it says, okay, you have a Rails project. We're going to take Code Climate Ruby and Code Climate Rubocop. We're going to install those engines and run our analysis. They do this to save space and network time and all that stuff, because all their analysis engines together could be, I think, fairly large. So they have a sort of like a base image that then just does analysis and decides how to fetch other analysis engines to run that. This would be at least difficult and probably unwise for us to try to like unspool. And where we've talked about things like just pre-installing everything and publishing a 30 gigabyte image or something, but like people can cache it locally, then it's kind of whatever.
Yeah, we used to do this, or we used to do this as well with the we have like our previous orchestrator would use a file detection to say if there's package JSON file, pull our SAST Node.js analyzer, and we were able to replace that with rules. So that's how we managed to break out into separate jobs there. So the actual job that relies on whatever the base image is there for doing the analysis would rely on the rules that matches that. It's a bit hacky to have to rely on rules because it's not that sophisticated for doing those things.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest issue there being you'd have to convert it to the specific report format too.
Yeah. So to the original security problem, I don't know if that frees us from needing Docker and privilege mode on the runner. Do you think it would?
I think it would if I'm understanding this correctly, if you had a code quality Ruby job whose base image is the fetched image that Code Climate would normally fetch, or rather, maybe there is a Docker file that uses that as the base image, and then that allows you to do whatever custom behavior on top of that. Then the actual Code Climate logic that fetches that image can be done using rules. At that point, there's no Docker in Docker. It's just using the base image and executing.
Right. So we'd be replacing the original Code Climate base image with rules and using individual engines ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. We have to decide how much we think we can rebuild in rules.
Yeah, it's a bit limited there.
Yeah.
One thing I will call out when we were trying to decide how we're going to do this and the transitions, where there was the deprecation and archiving of the orchestrator in favor of the vendor template and doing file and doing detection there, is that it was not a one-to-one replacement. There was a lot of conversation on, is it good enough that it's 80, 90, 95% of a replacement, and can we go with that? That was a decision that we were able, that was a conversation that we had to work through and make that evaluation. And that's what we ultimately did, because getting away from Docker and Docker was becoming imperative for us. And so just to call it out, it may not, what you may get may not be exact, but the question is for us was, is it good enough? And maybe that's a reframing of the conversation within code quality.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
That's...
All right, David, you've got one that's fun. So I know where this is coming from. All right.
Yeah, so basically, Thomas, you and I have had conversations before that you were going to create a process in which customers who find vulnerabilities in our images, all of our images, but in this particular case, it's actually a secure image, how we could intake that. And if that process has been created and documented as of yet, and if not, can I do today?
Okay, so let me restate your question because it is big. And so you're talking about within the containers or within the projects that we utilize within the containers themselves?
Within the containers themselves.
Within the containers themselves. Okay, the fun part about security tools, and I'm preaching a little bit, so apologies, is that all of them are going to find different things, and if they're provided without context, it's not every vulnerability is applicable to every context. And that's the challenge that we're running into here. Or at least that's the challenge that I'm running into, is that there may be a CVE for it, but it is only applicable in a durable web application context. Well, that's not what we run in. And so so that's part of what I'm hearing you ask for is that what's the documentation saying that this CVE is not applicable to us that you can hand to a customer itself? Is that part of what you're asking?
That is part of it, or if they actually find a legitimate vulnerability, because not all of these projects that we are not the owners of a lot of these projects. There are other communities as well. And so it's very possible that we are, there are other scanners that pick up true vulnerabilities as well. So, I mean, until we know that this CVE is not pertainable to this use case, that's definitely one thing, is a report to be able to say, yes, this scanner comes up with these vulnerabilities, but this is why they don't work in context. But the other part is an intake if there's an actual vulnerability, so that we can handle our security quickly, much more fast, rapidly, and agile.
Okay. So I'm going to give you a partial answer right now, both of which are related to my Q4 OKRs. Number one is an increase in dog fooding that we are doing within Secure itself. And the reason that I'm calling that out is that this is involving a mirroring of those open source projects that we rely upon so that we can run our own scans upon them. So this is a step that we are not currently taking. It's new. It's something that we're standing up today. There was a specific question around one analyzer in Slack about, and I'll write what that is here in just a minute, or link over to that thread in just a minute rather than vocalizing it. That's the one I'm going to start with, is mirroring that particular scanner, running it through our own tools and seeing what we find and see if we detect the same thing. And if that's the case, then we can contribute that fix back to that community. So that's the partial answer that I have, in that we're increasing we're using our own tools against the very things that we rely upon so that we can make them better. And so that should make us more proactive and also provide us with a mechanism of choosing when and what we're going to include and then therefore ship. So that's step one. Step two is a continuation of an ongoing effort that is really something that we have deservedly needed to have our hands slapped for, and that we were not managing the security dashboards on the very analyzer projects themselves. We're doing that. And that's lagged over the past few weeks, but we're going to continue that effort so that when we do dismiss a specific CVE, we can hand you the dismiss vulnerability with rationale as to why it has been dismissed. And that should be the documentation that we would start with. And if there's more needed than that, then that at least provides us a jumping off point for what we're discussing.
That is an excellent solution for me and answers my question. I do have a follow-up question, but if we could stop the recording for this one.
Yep. All right. Now, my question for everybody is, before we get to Taylor's sign off, is there anything, other questions that people would like to mention that we could begin to look at and answer asynchronously? All right, Taylor, you're our closer, sir.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for attending. I'm surprised we had such a good showing for this first attempt. We're going to be holding this weekly, so this is the place to bring your questions. If you want to see how a feature works, if you want to talk through how a feature works, we'll be giving demos for new things that we're working on. So tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your parents, come join us and chat about static analysis and all of our other secure features. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week.